I haven't told you guys what happened to me after the city council meeting the other night. They said, then they started. All right, here we go, folks. Well, good morning, everybody. It is Thursday, December 9th, 2021, and we have not been here continuously since December 7th. Feels a little bit like that, but before we call the meeting to order, I want to welcome everybody to the Edina Housing and Redevelopment Authority meeting. We're doing these meetings, at least for the time being, in person and electronically. We've got staff working from home in the remote locations. Director Bennerot, of course, drives an hour to get in here. I don't know what time she starts in the morning, but it's unbelievable. She comes here with a sunny attitude at 7:30 in the morning on a Thursday after working so hard all the time. So usually there'd be a couple of times to comment or call in and talk to the council or the HRA. But this morning there's only one opportunity, and that's during community comment, because we don't have any public hearing matters in front of the HRA this morning. So if you want to participate in community comment, the number may come up on the screen here, but I'll give it to you too. 800-374-0221. There it is right there. So if you're watching on Facebook or edinamn.gov live meetings or in cable TV, there's your call-in number. Conference ID number 315-4058. I want to thank Liz Olson for putting the script together. Give the operator your name, your street address, and your phone number, and then press *1, and then you'll get in the queue, and then Director Bennerot will bring you in to talk to the HRA, and you'll have 3 minutes. Just a reminder that you'll have 3 minutes to address us on an issue of concern to you that's not otherwise on the agenda today. So it's got to be something that's not on today's agenda or scheduled for a future public hearing. All right, let's call the meeting to order. And first matter of business this morning is Liz Olson, our Administrative Support Specialist, will call roll. Ms. Olson.
Commissioner Jackson. Here. Commissioner Anderson.
Here.
Commissioner Staunton.
Here.
Chair Hovland.
Here. Next matter is the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We've got a form of meeting agenda that's been published to the general public and also for our purposes. Is there anyone who wishes to modify the agenda in any form or fashion? All right, hearing nothing from staff or from commission members, is there a motion to approve the agenda as published?
So moved.
Is there a second? Okay, we've got a motion, Commissioner Jackson, second, Commissioner Anderson, to approve the HRA agenda for this Thursday, December 9, 2021. Any further discussion? All those in favor of approving the meeting agenda as published, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. And now we are back to community comment. So again, a reminder, 800-374-0221 is the number. And conference ID 315-4058, 315-4058. Call in, give the operator your name, address, telephone number, press star 1, and Director Benarott will get you in the queue. And we'll wait just a minute or so to see if anybody calls in. Director Benarott, are you seeing anybody calling in?
No, I'd like to wait until 7:41. I think we have about 30 more seconds. But
Okay.
as of now, no one is
We
calling
will do
in.
that.
And it is now 7:41, so I think it is safe for you to move forward with the agenda.
All right, thank you very much. Next, we're going to move on to the consent agenda. There's a couple of items on the consent agenda this morning. Is there any commissioner that wishes to remove either of those items or both of them from the consent agenda? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as shown.
So moved.
Commissioner Jackson moves.
Second.
Commissioner Staunton seconds. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of the consent agenda as shown, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. And now on to the heart of the meeting, which is reports and recommendations, along with, we'll also today be going into closed session to discuss the possible sale of some real property that we own. But the first matters of the day are in the reports and recommendations section. And Bill Neuendorf, our economic development manager, has a couple of matters for us to consider this morning. One is something we've been talking about for, probably a year, and that's the decertification of the Southdale 2 tax increment financing district. He's got a presentation involving that. So Manager Neuendorf, welcome, and go ahead with your presentation.
Yes, thank you, and good morning. This first item pertains to Resolution 2021-14, and as you stated, it does relate to the decertification of the Southdale 2 tax increment financing district. I have a brief presentation to walk through this item. It's fairly simple, but it's also very significant. This tax increment financing district has been a true accelerator for redevelopment and major and frankly massive investment into the city of Edina in the Southdale district. This was a special TIF district that was set up with legislation as we emerged from the Great Recession back in 2008. There was a special law passed for all cities throughout the state to use TIF to get the economy moving again, and we took advantage of that in 2011. So the map on the screen shows the boundaries of that district. It really focused on the mall, but also the properties that surrounded the mall. At that time, it was quite some time ago, but the mall was not a shining star for the city at that point. There was a lot of concerns about the future of it. Would it benefit the surrounding properties, or would it drag them down? We saw a lot of development interest, but nobody was willing to make that first step. It was just too uncertain. So at the time, this chart shows the economic decline of the property. We could get numbers as far back as 2005, but both the tax capacity was falling. That's the measure that the city and the county tax assessor use. But a number that we're maybe more familiar with is the market value, the estimated market value. That nearly dropped by half during the recession years. It was due in part to the recession, but it was also due in part to just a number of conditions where the mall was aging and it was not seeing that reinvestment, and that was actually hurting not just the mall, but the surrounding properties. So where this map ends is when we started the tax increment district. That was started in 2012. And after that time, you can see the fortunes really reversing and accelerating from where they had been. So the tax capacity was restored to where it had been, and then it kept going up. The estimated market value, hit it sunk to a low of about 118 million. By about 2015, it had returned back to where it was pre-recession at about 200. Today, we're getting close to 300 million. So it's a true success story from an economic development perspective, and it shows the power of what a relatively small investment from the city can have. This chart shows the growth of the tax capacity. When we started the TIF district in 2000, the original year was 2011. It's almost doubled since that time. And if this were a simple small shopping center, that really wouldn't be that impressive, doubling. But when you're a massive regional mall and regional center with healthcare facilities, apartments, shopping, office space, etc., to have such a large number double is truly significant for any community. And we saw a lot of projects. In that TIF district alone, we saw 18 major redevelopment projects. We couldn't even count all of the small business remodels and new businesses coming in. But 18 massive projects from, as I mentioned, new housing, new fitness, new medical office, new furniture galleries, new restaurants, a major expansion at the Galleria, new senior facilities. I think truly that area looks significantly different from what it did just 10 years ago. Here's a list of those 18 projects, and I wanted to include this on the list. We often hear criticisms that the city uses TIF on every single project and we're just out here to benefit the developers. So here's the list of the 18 projects in the TIF district, and the first one on the list was the major remodel to Southdale Center. We did provide a $5 million TIF loan to that project, but every other project was self-financed. We only used TIF, as it turns out, once in that district over the life of it. But we did use the tax increment, not so much in that district, but to benefit other parts of Edina. And one of the major focuses was on affordable housing. After the city passed the affordable housing policy in 2015, we had visions, we had hopes, but we didn't have money. And affordable housing still costs money to build. So we used some of the tax increment proceeds from that district to help support 5 different projects so far. From the 66 West apartments to apartments over on Amundsen and 70th. We've got an upcoming senior building on 70th Street. We helped stabilize a NOAA property. That was an existing apartment that was for sale in the marketplace, and it was going to go market rate unless we could help subsidize the developer, an affordable housing developer that invested in it. And then we also started a new program focusing on single-family homes. So far we've invested $9.3 million of those TIF dollars in these projects throughout the city. And then as this whole area has done so well, there's an additional $7+ million available for more affordable housing projects. And our manager, Stephanie Hawkinson, is working hard to put those monies in the ground rather than in a bank account, but into new projects. So expect more on those in the next few years. This district was created for economic development purposes, and that's how we started. That's how we intend to finish it. So earlier this year, you approved a spending plan to address how the city could use some of those unobligated funds to spark other investments in the community. We've branded that the Spark program, really focusing on special projects and redevelopment throughout the city. So a few weeks ago, you did approve that program. There's a policy that guides it. There's a state law that further guides it. And from this particular TIF district, we've invested about $8 million in that program to support new projects in the next few years.
I like your new acronym, that's SPARK.
Thanks.
And that you left off the F at the end at the fund part, so it didn't say SPARK. That wouldn't have had nearly the impact as Spark.
We have a really good team here that puts those together, including the names and the graphics. So in the resolution, it does address two very simple items. It just recognizes and formally decertifies this tax district at the end of December. The other notable element in the resolution is that it does recognize a surplus of just under $200,000. That would be declared a surplus, redistributed back to the county, who in turn gives a little bit back to the city, a little bit back to the schools, and a little bit to the county. We arrived at that amount because we partnered with both the Richfield and Edina schools in this district for many years. About half the district is in each of those districts. And as we look to wind this down, we also wanted to be good neighbors and beneficiaries to our school districts that we rely on so much for our community. And we learned along the way that surpluses from TIF districts that go back to the schools, while it helps in one year, the state penalizes the school district the next year, and it's a wash. So as we've worked with our municipal finance advisors, who are also the school district's finance advisors, we learned that the maximum they can benefit is only $25,000. Any benefit to them in excess of that gets returned to the state. So that's how we did the math to come up at this kind of odd number. We wanted to provide as much of a cash benefit to the school districts as we could without resulting in a major penalty to them the next year. So that's also embodied in the resolution. So with that, I'm available for any questions, and we certainly recommend approval of this resolution this morning.
Questions from commissioners or comments? Commissioner Jackson?
Yeah, just briefly, if you could go back to those projects and tell me, there was an apartment building I'm not familiar with. So the pictures you had, for the housing.
The Villanova picture.
Yeah. The affordable housing slide.
Oh,
Yeah.
So many
Yeah, so
slides.
the one on our the lower left corner, tell me where that's located?
Yeah, that's, it is, I forgot the name of the street.
Right behind Room and Board.
Sandell. It's at 70th and Sandell.
Okay.
There's a series of 2 or 3 three-story apartments, one condo building that was built in the late 1960s. And it's nice housing stock. It's simple, it's solid, but it was in danger of being sold to the private sector that would have either torn it down or jacked up the rent. And we stepped in and helped preserve it.
Okay, terrific, thank you.
And was that Aon too?
That was Aon, correct.
Yeah, I thought so. And then they rehabbed it.
Correct. They did a relatively minor rehab. Just stabilized it. I think new roof and new siding and those types of things,
right,
to give it another 20, 30 years of good life.
Yeah, good. I'm sure the people that are living there are really pleased, because I think no one got disrupted from their living circumstance. I think there were quite a few seniors in there. It's good to know.
Yeah.
Ms. Hawkinson, yeah, just affirming that. Good to know. So do you want to talk on a broad sort of basis about the consequences of the decertification and what you expect to see going back to the respective taxing entities?
Sure, happy to get into that a little bit more. So when we declare a surplus, the surplus funds go back to the county. The county then gives a share back to the city, and back to each of the school districts, and then keeps a share for themselves. A couple years ago, we thought that would end up as being a huge surplus to benefit the schools as well as the cities. As it turns out, once we talked to the municipal advisors and the school financial advisors that actually do that on a regular basis, we learned it's not a surplus. It actually results in a penalty. So we asked Ellers to calculate how much we could direct to the schools. In this case, we're the deciding factor, and that's how we came up with this number, $195,000. So that in conjunction with the change in laws this year that allows us to continue to invest those monies in new projects, albeit for a short window of time. We only have a few years to do it. We feel we can take maximum advantage of these dollars.
Manager Neal.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. Bill, could you go back to the slide where you show there's the no TIF slide? That one. The only thing I want to add to this is that it's important for us to remember that all of that development that you see there that's happened out there also goes to the benefit of benefiting the school districts that are involved in this as well. They get the same ability to tax that new growth that occurred, we believe, because of the catalytic effect of what we did at Southdale Center. Just like we told you the other night during our budget hearing, I think it's going to create $6 million or so in new tax capacity. It also creates that same new tax capacity for school districts as well, for both the Richfield and the Edina schools.
I remember when we determined that we were going to lend that $5 million to Southdale Center, I think out of the Centennial Lakes TIF district, and wondering whether that was really going to make a difference, because with an 80-acre parcel, that historic mall, kind of the 500-pound gorilla in that part of our community, was it going to make a difference or not? And then we knew that Simon, there'd been a succession of owners too that had done nothing to improve the property. And then when Simon put it into that special category because of its historic status and invested $40 million in the remodel, and our $5 million on top of it from a loan standpoint. And then we got some other nice negotiated, not concessions really, but just elements of the deal with the new transit hub in the northeast corner of the site, a place to put a water treatment facility if we needed to. There were some nice elements of the overall deal that were structured, as I recall. And then we kind of worried about, will that give enough confidence to all those property owners around there to reinvest in their businesses, in their properties? And it wasn't more than a year when that one Southdale project came to us, and off we went to the races here. So it's a phenomenal story of the use of TIF. So for the folks in our town that are wringing their hands, I mean, it's a small number of people, about TIF, I think we've used it in a real judicious manner, and this is a great story to tell about the power of it being used the right way.
The only other detail I'll add is where the $5 million came from. The $5 million came from the Centennial Lakes TIF district.
Another TIF district.
And we did an internal borrowing, and I believe we ended up charging ourselves 4% on the money, which was a statutory cap. And for probably up until today, that's been the best producing investment we've had in our investment portfolio for 10 years, just given market rates.
Side story too. Yeah, so quite a story. Any other questions? All right, Manager Nooner, Commissioner Anderson.
Yeah, thank you. Just in general question, so what's the tax effect of this in 2022, tax year 2022, and going forward, although that's hard to project, we don't know what EMVs will be, but if you were speculating, maybe we have that number.
I've heard of it.
We had it at the council meeting.
Yeah.
Sorry, let me see if I can find that.
Scott looks for the number. I know that, so the tax capacity, when the tax capacity of this district doubles, that adds 4% to the city's total tax capacity. So again, if you start with a small number, 4% isn't that meaningful. when you start with a tax capacity the size of the city of Edina, and you increase it by 4% in 1 year, and then you get to keep it there for the next forever with inflationary growth, that number, that's a big jump. The actual impact to the tax dollar, I think Scott has that information.
I believe it was 6.8 million in tax capacity, not total estimated market value growth. That number is closer to 600 million, something like that.
Okay, so about 6.8 million in revenues in 2022.
In tax capacity growth that we
Yes.
would tax with our tax rates.
Yeah, good, thank you. That's impressive. That number's impressive. Thank you.
And
Thank you, Commissioner.
we'll have a little bit more information for you next summer. I've asked Ellers to prepare a year-end report on this. I don't know if we've done that before in Edina, but it's good to, once you've got the final numbers in and they've gone through the auditor and they've gone through the state, that's a time to actually look at this and look at the real fiscal impact. So we think with the audit being done in April, typically reports to the state in June, we're looking at summertime to have a more detailed report to you, just for informational purposes, but that is something we intend to do.
Very good. All right. Is there a motion to approve Resolution 2021-14, which would approve the decertification of the Southdale 2 Tax Increment Financing District?
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion by Commissioner Jackson, a second by Commissioner Anderson, to approve the Resolution 2021, which would provide for the decertification of the Southdale 2 Tax Increment Financing District. Any further question? All those in favor of the motion as stated, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. And then the other matter that Manager Newendorf has for us this morning in this portion of the agenda is 7001 France, the project update there regarding tax increment financing.
Yes, and thank you. This is an update on this project. Our finance staff has been working hard on this one for the last year or so, working with the developers as they've tried to right-size the project for the marketplace. So I wanted to provide an update and also let you know what our intended direction is. We're kind of taking this in small steps. It's a big project. I mean, it's almost $250 million investment in the community. The requested involvement of TIF is also a big number. Before we get too far along, we just want to make sure that we're meeting your expectations on this project. And this morning, I am joined by representatives from the developers. Ted Carlson with Orion is here with us this morning. Nate Podratz and Tom Atchinson from Mortensen. And then Brent Webb, the project lead, is on the line this morning also from Mortensen. So the project, as you recall, this received its revised zoning approvals a few weeks ago. Takes the 6-acre parcel, subdivides it into four parts. Each piece would get its own building on it. The real anchor is a new commercial office building on the corner, supplemented by a new residential high-rise. And then U.S. Bank is currently on the site. They will remain on the site. They are the first investors in, the first doors open on this one. So this is a view looking actually from if you're standing on the roof of the new bank, this is what you'd see looking to the northeast. The office in the foreground. You can see the Westin in the far background. The new residential high-rise. The parking structure has been removed from the basement and the podium to a standalone building. This is the view looking to the north on one of the new streets that is proposed. They've made a number of changes to enliven the site and make it a place that people want to visit, make it more walkable, make it more friendly to workers, customers, and residents. And then renderings of that new parking structure. So when the city uses tax increment financing, we always talk about public benefit to make sure that we're not over-subsidizing, using these dollars in a wise way. We always provide a pledge, so it's rarely money up front. It's typically after they successfully finish the project. That's when we start reimbursement for those eligible costs. As we've been working on this over the summer, there's a lot of qualifying costs, but not all of them deliver public benefit in our eyes. But there are two large buckets that we've talked about before. That is just the cost to take the 6-acre property and split it into 4 pieces with roads and stormwater and streetscaping and landscape and plaza. That's a big number. We think that truly is a public benefit. The other number is the parking. And we've talked about having district parking in this area. It's a concept that's in our comprehensive plan. It's certainly an eligible cost. But it's been really hard to pin down what that means for a project like this. We're constrained by the fact that it's, number one, very expensive to build parking. There are certainly questions in the future. How much parking do we need in 50 years? But what we do know is that in order to finance the building and put tenants in the building, they need to park today. And we're running into concerns of, there's certainly a willingness on behalf of the developers to put some type of easement for public use. But if they open their arms too broadly for public use, that will damage their ability to actually lease the building. Could damage the ability to finance the building. So we're trying to walk that line. In other projects, we haven't necessarily had to do that. But I just think where the market is today, where pricing is today, we're really looking at a much narrower focus. So far, your staff is not super excited about this condition. So it's been great working with Mortensen and Orion, trying to find out a solution that maybe we can all live with, and we can still get that public benefit. And that's what I wanted to summarize this morning. The strategy going forward. If you're in general agreement, we plan to keep running. Probably be back to you in January or February at the latest with a term sheet, and then get this in the market and start working on real construction contracts, et cetera. So here's the summary of the public benefit as we see it from this project. And a lot of it is being first. Just like Southdale Mall was the first to put money into that particular neighborhood that then spun off lots of other investment. So this would be the first project to actually subdivide a superblock per those Southdale guidelines. I've talked about the benefits of that. We've had lots of people express interest. The consultants like it, the planners like it, the architects tend to like it. It's very difficult to actually get it built. So this could be the first to actually see that happen. And the reason I stress the first is if the city uses TIF, we want to be very cautious that it doesn't set the expectation that every project in Edina gets TIF. That has not been our past practice. It has not been our policy. We could certainly change our policy, but I don't think that's your intention either. But for this first one, it might be necessary to stretch a little bit further than we normally might. This would also be the first project to fully abide by the new sustainability policy. The architects and developers have been working with the city staff on that matter. They're very willing to keep moving forward, but they do note it's a cost to the project. So at this point, the budgeted cost to add EV chargers, as to the extent required in this new policy, adds about $650,000 to the project. And that's just the chargers. That's not all the glass and the high efficiency HVAC systems and everything else. So it's a notable cost. The developer's excited to do it. They're willing to do it. They've done it before, but it all costs money. This would also be the first new office building in Edina in more than 20 years. I'd mentioned this before. Our most recent Class A building was built, was Centennial Lakes, built 20-some years ago. That's not Class A anymore. And this could be one of the first new buildings to be built in a post-pandemic world, where the expectation of tenants is much different than it was 3 years ago. It would also contribute the new structured parking for the shared use. We're still striving, and I think we can reach agreement on some of the stalls having a public easement on them. Probably not all of the stalls, as we've done for other projects, but certainly some of them. And one other thing we're looking into is an ownership right. So we've talked about the future and what does parking look like in 50 years or 100 years. The developer is willing to work with us to see if there's a way where the city could take title to the property underneath the parking garage, so that if parking isn't needed in 50 years, the city has an ownership stake in that property, and we can decide, well, what is this land used for? You know, way back in 2020, it was needed for parking. In 2070, it might be needed for helipads or transporters or a water treatment plant or who knows what. If the city has an ownership stake in the land, that truly is a public investment. So we think there's a way to do it. We've done something similar with that Reuter-Walton project, where the city initially started off with an easement for a future roadway, but that easement converts to an ownership stake when we actually build the road. We could follow a similar model here. We need to talk to both of our respective attorneys on how to actually do that. But in lieu of having a full parking easement, that might be an equivalent in my mind. And then the other public benefit, something that it's not to be overlooked. It's frankly nothing special about this project, but it's a significant boost. So the property tax base is certainly increased by just a massive amount. When you put a $250 million investment into the property will pay park dedication fees. That's several million. That's cash to the park district. It'll pay a couple million in the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, cash into that fund to meet other city goals. So just, you know, those dollars come out of every project, but when your project is this big, you know, it moves the needle on some of those other areas.
Could you go back to that slide, Bill? A question comes to my mind on the possible conversion to fee title ownership if the parking's no longer needed. Let's say 30, 40 years from now, 50 years from now, the fee title's still vested in the entity that owns all the property out there. Instead of having, but instead of us having a need for it, the owner decides that this could come down and we could have a new building here that would serve another purpose, but we can build some parking into it. If you have a conversion thought like that and not a reversionary interest like we're talking about here, is there some way that we could think about some sort of acceleration of or recapture, I guess would be a better word, because a TIF note would be long paid off. Mm-hmm. Some kind of recapture of public investment on that parking structure, or some kind of return on that investment over and above what we had helped do way back when.
That's exactly what we had in mind. So it's hard to project what that project might be, but let's say in 50 years, you don't need 500 parking stalls, you only need 100. And the parking garage is old, needs a lot of maintenance, needs to be rebuilt. So theoretically, it could be replaced with new housing or new office with a smaller amount of parking. Well, at that point, the city owns the property. So in order, you know, while we might lease the property to build this parking garage for, you know, lease it for $1 or whatever, when the future happens, and now that land is more valuable because it's needed for new office, new parking, new office, retail, residential, whatever it is, the city has two things: control and ownership. So if someone wants to use our land for something different, there's a cost to use the city's land in 50 years. So that's kind of the payback. We get that property interest. And then, you know, another group would decide, is it appropriate to sell that interest, to lease that interest? Does the city need it for our own purposes? Who knows what the options might be in 50 years? But the point we want to make here is that we might have options, something we don't have today.
Right, and that lets you deal with then current market conditions too, in terms of the value of things. So that's probably even a better approach. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay, all right, good. Thanks for that little extra detail.
So those are the 4 or 5 primary benefits that we're seeing at this point. The rest of the, and I'm going to walk through this really quickly. There's, of course, our list of things we're not going to use TIF for. We don't use TIF to pay for a bank. We don't use TIF to pay for luxury housing. We don't use TIF to pay for a private office building someplace. But it's those public elements that we're more interested in. We've updated our financial projections. Our team at Ellers has done this. Depending on the future valuations, the actual tax increment that might be generated in over 15 years is between 20 and 25 million. Safely, they feel that a number about 23 million is a right target for this. Higher than that, they're concerned that it might never be paid. So my point is that's a little bit different from my last estimate, which I think is at 18 to 20 million. Now we're a little bit 20 to 25. So that's the update. And I know there's a lot in that update. But I guess the questions for you and what staff would appreciate learning as well as the developer is, does this meet your expectation? The developers asked the city to go all in, so to speak, on TIF for the next 15 years, not 25, only 15. But staff can certainly be comfortable with that. We will just want to make sure that the public benefit that we're delivering meets your expectations. If you think it does, be helpful to hear that. If you think we're short or have any ideas, happy to hear that as well. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Commissioners, any thoughts? Commissioner Jackson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have a bunch of questions. I'm going to start with the most important one, though, and that is, we talk about a lot of firsts here and things that we're doing. I hope that in the process of doing this, we document that, and I would like to see some benchmarking type of I don't know, vehicles. I don't know the right noun for that, but where we set the goals. This is our goal. This is what we want to learn from this, and then what we learn. And so we did this. This is what our expectation, like a scientific experiment, right? This is our thesis. This is our testing, and this is our hypothesis testing thesis, right? So I'd like to see that documented. This is a first, and we're taking a lot of risk. Everybody involved in this is taking risk in building it. And so I'd like to have some documentation of what it is that we think is going to happen, especially with, just what were our goals? And when this is the first thing that we're doing, what did we learn? And especially on both parking and sustainability. That really jumped out at me when we were looking at that. The other question I have, and this previous slide to this, I didn't see street building on it. But the question that I have is, my understanding is that building a city street is darn expensive. And in my previous life, the cost of a block of city street, we had an estimate on that. And I know Mr. Milner's not here, but do you know approximately how much it costs to build one block of a city street?
I don't have that number, but for this project, the site costs are easily 8 to 10 million for the roadway structure, roads, sidewalks, landscaping in the front. We're easily 8 to 10 million.
Okay, so that kind of, just to put that in perspective of what 23 million means, close to half of that is just the cost of the streets. And then my final question is, when are we estimating that the commercial building will be built? Because I know they're going to build the bank first, and just sort of, get a sense of, and the planning has to begin now, but when are we going to break ground on that commercial building?
Yeah, we don't have a specific date yet, but we're aiming at the bank building and the site preps happening in 2022.
Okay.
I think it would take less than a year to build the bank. Once that's established and in operation, they can tear down the old bank and finish with the rest of the project. So if all goes well, it would be as early as 2023.
Okay.
The developer is working on this aggressively. This is a current project. It's not a future wish. It's something they, once they take ownership and get the financing, they are going to start rolling.
Terrific. Okay, those are my questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You're just looking for feedback in general, I think,
Yes.
this morning. Thank you. Well, you know, it's not a secret that I tend to be a minimalist in terms of TIF support for projects. And I do think, however, that there is significant public value to this project. It's an approved project, so I'm past that. And I guess, you know, we look at this and I say there's a lot of things here that make sense and do accrue to the public benefit. There's also other items that, in my opinion only, don't really create public benefit as such, other than the use that comes out of it, which is by the proposed design. And so some of these items come as a direct result of the application, the design, and the concept. So it's at the developer's discretion as to what is proposed. And I think especially with the parking structure, that becomes kind of an obstacle for me. So you know, when we discuss the all-in concept, I'm not sure that I am agreeable to all-in. However, I do think that, as I mentioned, there is public benefit here, and in a scaled-down amount, which I understand costs, and I understand what's gone into this, and I understand the risk that's involved. Should there be a public risk that runs concurrent with that, and what's to be gained? And it would be significant to gain if completed in a successful project, yes. But there are pieces of this that I question, and so that would be my feedback. We'll see what's actually proposed. This looks like an awful lot of money to me, and it's been an ongoing discussion, so it's not a new one, and so thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Sutton, any feedback you want to provide?
Yeah, I'm going to pick up, I think, on maybe a different way of saying what Commissioner Anderson and Commissioner Jackson have been talking about. And in some ways, I think what we're going to need to do here is figure out how to articulate the but-for. Because what we're trying to do with the Southdale district plan and the design experience guidelines is reconfigure the fundamental layout of the Southdale area. And I understand the developer has been telling us that that there's a gap, and I think the developer is a very credible developer, and I believe there's a gap, but we need to articulate why that is. Why is this not working? Because even though we may want this to be the only one, if we learn that it is going to cost, that we're going to have a gap on all of these projects when we're reconfiguring the basic layout, we should know that before we start in on the first one, because then the next ones are going to come to us and we should have a good grasp on that. So I think I hear the three of us, and I assume the mayor as well, saying the same thing, that is, there is this discussion of what's the money going for. And I get the eligible expenses and the non-eligible expenses, et cetera. But how are we going to explain, and how are we going to understand why we have to do this, and why we have to do this at the amount that we're talking about? And then what is that going to drive for future projects that come to us? So that'd be my kind of encouragement, to think about that as you're kind of coming back to us and working out the deal.
Thanks.
For me, I would say that when you think about this as a $250 million project, if you take that overarching view first and apply that sort of general principle we've been following of keeping any TIF assistance at about the 10% of at least projected market value, it seems to be right about that percentage. It's a significant amount of money, but because of all the firsts involved, there's a lot of significant work to be done. And so I think being first is an Edina tradition, but being first and being smart being first is also an Edina tradition, and that's essential here too. And I think both you as a representative of the residents of our community and our council are doing a good job that way. And I think the developer is very sensitive to it too, because I know at least two of the people in the audience that work for the developer live in the city of Edina, and they care about it too. I also think that this is another way of talking about what Member Staunton was talking about. I'm assuming this will be a pay-as-you-go note, and so
Yes.
you didn't talk much about risk or any potential risk shifting, but I'm assuming that if it works the way we normally do it on a TIF-related project, that risk does not shift. The risk stays on the developer to produce what they say they're going to produce, and then the note kind of follows along in a cumulative sort of fashion as those expenditures occur. So do you see any point here with respect to the public elements where you're a little bit anxious about any risk shifting?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we're following our traditional pattern. So the developer would incur the risk. That's kind of that's on their side of the table, and we would pledge the support upon completion of the project. The city would then make good on our pledge. If the project never gets built, never gets completed, the city's out nothing but a little bit of time. A little bit of my time is all we're out. So I don't expect anything in this project to shift or change that practice. So the risk would stay with the developer.
Yeah, so that's an interesting point too, is that the developer is going to go ahead and do all these things. It's going to build those new internal streets. It's going to do all that public infrastructure work. But to get to the point where we're going to start reimbursing them on the TIF note, the whole project has to be completed. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah. All 4 paths would have to be finished in order for them to start getting paid from the TIF account.
So along the way, we're going to be seeing public benefit without any public risk. And at the end of the day, we're not going to see public risk either. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, those are my comments. I think you're doing some creative thinking on that public parking structure too. You know, we're not going to be around 50 years from now, but that may be a prime location within that beautiful new development that we want to put something else. And then it won't be so new either, will it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
Well, thank you.
we knew all along that this project, Southdale, you made a good point earlier. I thought that Southdale kind of helped reset the district when the mall was remodeled, and it allowed us to do a lot of things. But now we're going to take Southdale District in a new direction, and this is the first project that sets the tone for how things are going to happen in the future in the Southdale District. So we're stepping out here a little bit, but we're not stepping out of our comfort zone, and we're doing things that are smart, and I think on behalf of us, you're doing things that are smart. So thanks for that.
Okay. Good. Well, thank you. We'll keep working on this and be back to you early in the year.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right, we've got a matter to talk about, which is a potential sale of real property, and of course, that's always a delicate conversation. It's the public works property, old public works property over at 5146 Eden Avenue. And we were going to go into closed session to discuss the potential use of that property, potential sale of that property. We're permitted to do that by Minnesota statutes 13D.05 subdivision 3. And so is there a motion to close the HRA meeting as permitted by the defined statute to discuss a potential sale of real property at 5146 Eden Avenue?
So moved.
Second.
All right, we got a motion by Commissioner Staunton, second by Commissioner Anderson to move into closed session to discuss a potential sale of real property at 5146 Eden Avenue as permitted by state statute. Any further discussion? All those in favor of moving into closed session to discuss the matter defined, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. We are now in closed session. I think we've got in council chambers, we have all the key people that need to be here. We don't have anyone that should not be here.
You just need a few minutes to close.
Yeah, and we'll go ahead and do that. So to the extent that people want to